Welcome to a special 5-part series where we dive into learning about ADHD. I'm joined by 5 successful female leaders who all have diagnosed ADHD. I'm deeply curious to understand their stories and to learn both how they've learned to thrive in a neurotypical world and how as leaders we can keep building cultures where everyone belongs and reaches their highest potential. Today I am thrilled to have Julie Robertson join me. Julie, lovely to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Let me share your bio so people know who I'm talking to. So Julie is a dynamic diversity and inclusion specialist, an ADHD advocate, an actual ADHDer, a keynote speaker, executive leader, and a freelance strategist with over 25 years of experience in the community, not-for-profit, and social impact sectors. Her career spans roles in strategy, transformative change, startups, and impact and innovation projects, both in Australia and the UK. Julie's played a pivotal role in major reforms requiring significant change across the disability and community sectors, including as the former CEO of Specialisterne Australia, a multi-award-winning social impact enterprise, where she transitioned the organisation into a global entity working across 15 countries. Julie, as I said, brilliant to have you here. After all of that, who are you as a human being? Tell us about you.
Well, obviously a very successful ADHDer, if I live by that bio. As a person, I am definitely a person that's driven by impact, as you can hear from my bio. And as a person, I have grown up in a headspace where I just know that I've always wanted to make a difference. Whether that's the component of the ADHD brain wanting to problem solve and fix things, inadvertently it's driven me to the career that I've got today. I am a passionate, active person. I love dog walking, I love traveling. Obviously I'm originally from the UK, so I love a bit of adventure and change. And again, I'm a person that is not afraid of taking risk. And that's been, again, quite visible in my career around the work that I've done to date and the different sort of spaces that I have, I suppose, explored. So yeah, I think that I'm a person that likes challenge, and I'm a person that likes to shake things up a bit.
So, Julie, thank you. As you pointed out, and we can hear, there's an accent in there somewhere. So why don't we go back and tell us about, you and your background and growing up in school and all those things, and how did you end up here in Australia?
Sure. I grew up in a very working class family in Scotland, one of 4 children, had a very normal council school background that you would imagine. Also a struggle, I would say, as an undiagnosed ADHD child, having different challenges with friendships and actually integrating in school. I also had the changeability of we moved part of the way through school, but luckily for me, that was my unknown and unconscious ability to use my previous experiences from my first school experience to rehearse, mask, and adapt all my behaviours to become quite successful in my next few school experiences. Very hard work, but something I was able to do because as a chameleon, or as a person that can pivot behaviour, as you do unconsciously with ADHD, I was able to adapt to the environment pretty well, but it did make my life at home challenging, and my energy quite challenging. I actually had an experience in high school where I had an expulsion or a suspension from school in high school for an outburst that they said was due to a mental health issue. But now, in hindsight, as an adult and knowing what I know now, I know that that was a burnout period. That is something that we know now from fact, that these things do occur in people that are neurodivergent. But at that time, there wasn't enough experience, I think, and enough awareness around what ADHD looked like or what ASD looked like in a female presentation.
Can I ask just a quick question then? Because I remember when you and I first met, and I found it quite fascinating. You talked about this chameleon and your ability to kind of actually build really good relationships, but you always had a bit of a mask on in building those relationships.
Yeah, it's funny, even my good friends from school now, one of my really good friends from school actually said to me as an adult, I wish we had been better friends, because you were always on the peripheral. She said you actually like sort of skirted along every group, jumping in and jumping out and fitting into all different types of activities, but never giving enough of yourself or never putting enough of your cards out to let people actually know who you were. And I was like, I actually think that was a self sort of preservation mechanism, that actually being able to jump in and out of groups, meet people and engage people and learn about people was my way of actually integrating with groups, but keeping enough of myself back so that people didn't actually see the default mechanisms that were sitting behind. And it's actually only my really good friends that I've stayed in touch with that have said now that it's obviously, now as an adult, you're like, that was very obvious in ADHD behaviour and a sort of self-defence mechanism.
Interesting. So from school then, where did that kind of take you? What were your interests? What were you following?
Oh, in school, I always had a passion for the underdog, and I was very creative and artistic. And originally I had wanted to go to art school, but because I had working class parents who wanted the best for me, I obviously had to sort of go with their sort of flow of, if you want to take on post-school education and go into tertiary environment, pick a career that's going to take you somewhere. It was those old school baby boomer parents that didn't believe that a creative career would be a successful career.
Yes.
I originally intended to study law. And then actually I had come out to Australia because my older sibling was here and had gone to Australia when I was quite young. I was curious and decided to do a year out in Australia. And while I was out in Australia, she introduced me to her friend's son, who she originally introduced me to as being someone the same age as me and who she wanted me to meet. And when I met Ben, he actually was classically autistic. He had no communication. He was non-verbal completely, like I said, no communication. He maybe had gestures and things like that, but he was really unusual and really someone that I hadn't come across before. And yet he fascinated me. So through the course of that year traveling, I ended up doing a lot of work in disability or volunteering. And it drove me to the point of contacting my university and changing my major to psychology. And I ended up studying behavioural psychology and developmental psychology so that I could better understand why we develop in a certain way and why people end up being as they are and behaving or developing the types of behaviours or characteristics that they do. So that fascinated me. And that's sort of been prolific in my career today.
So did you then start working in the UK and then, like, or did you stay here, or how did that sort of happen?
So I had to return to the UK. I returned to the UK, and when I returned to the UK, sorry, I've got dogs barking in the background. When I returned to the UK, I finished my studies and did placement in the UK. I ended up working for one of the largest peak bodies in autism in the UK, which gave me really good experience. And I stayed in that job until I emigrated to Australia. So I think I was in that job for 3 years. That's another interesting thing about my career. I've had, in my early career, you can see that if you look at my career profile, I've had really changeable or regular stints of quick turnover roles, less than 2 years.
Yes.
When I look back on my career history, if you look at the jobs that I have spent more time in, or the roles that I've spent more time in, now that I understand, it's generally roles where I have got a passion or a hyper focus that I tend to do better in. I don't do well in the BAU space where I have to do repetitive work, or I don't do well in an area that doesn't drive my passion, or I can't fix something. So that's why I probably stayed so long as I did in the autism organisation in the UK, because it was so different. It changed all the time. And I was a rookie as a leader, and there was some jobs that people didn't want to do that I probably took on because I didn't want to admit defeat or not do something. So that actually allowed me to test myself and challenge myself, which which allowed me to be successful because nobody else wanted to pick it up.
I love that. That's a story of many people's career, I think. Like, just do all the things no one else wants to do, and you learn so much. Did that, you know how you said you jumped around sort of from role to role and sort of struggled in a BAU capacity. Did that hinder at any point your career, or did you get asked questions around, you know, why you move so much and things like that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Especially when I first came to Australia, like, but the first 3 or 4 years when I came to Australia, most of the like jobs that I had, probably I was a year, 18 months in most of those jobs. And I guarantee you that when I went to interview, one of the first things that an interviewer would say is, I can see that you've got instability, or that you have like churn and turnover in your roles. And it was hard at first to actually talk to that or to explain it, especially because I didn't obviously know at that point in time, or I wasn't certain in I probably knew that there was something going on, especially because my colleagues and my friends were saying that I had job ADHD, which was funny. They said that from a very early stage, that I had job ADHD, and I'm like, no, it goes a bit wider than that. But I actually developed a narrative that I could eventually, and I think employers and businesses have gotten better at it now, but I actually developed the narrative of saying, look, my skill set lies in going in to look at something and establish what's going on, to actually identify a problem, set up strategy and fixes, or develop a plan to take it where it needs to go. And that's the reason why when something becomes established, or a program or a job becomes settled, I don't think I'm needed anymore, or unless there's changeability in it. So I was actually able to turn it around eventually and talk about it as a strength. I was able to say to recruiters and executive teams, look, my stints in business are usually fixed term or short because I go in for a specific purpose.
Yes.
I have an experience in numerous fields or areas, whether it's disability, housing, or early childhood, or health, actually allows me to bring in the expertise or the experience or the learnings that I have gained from every environment, and allows me to bring this to that role. And I actually think that that's not a disadvantage. It might well be that my tenure looks short, but in terms of the knowledge that I bring and the sort of wealth of different sort of tools that I can bring in to actually help advance the organisation I'm working in, I think that's valuable.
Absolutely valuable. When did you get diagnosed with ADHD?
Funnily enough, like the trend, I got diagnosed during COVID. So I think I just turned 41.
Had you, help me understand the time frame here, had you been the CEO of Specialisterne at that point, or where were you?
Yes, absolutely. I was at Specialisterne. I actually took that role on in late 2019, so that was pre-COVID. Very aware of neurodivergence, particularly autism, so I had a really solid understanding of that. I've got several family members who are on the spectrum. So I think I was, and I had worked for so many autism peak bodies or disability services through my career. But like I said, ADHD hadn't been a thing that I had thought about. Probably in the back of my head, jokingly, some of the things that I had said or had been said between colleagues, but it wasn't really prolific or obvious at that point in time. It wasn't, the conversation wasn't out there about females in ADHD. No. And as I went through COVID, and as I was working as an executive in a CEO position with a lot of responsibility in a changeable environment.
Yes.
I could manage that because obviously as an ADHD person, change is not an issue for me. As long as I can use the tools and strategies that I had at my arsenal to use.
Yes.
However, at the same time as all that was happening, I had a breakdown in my personal relationship and in my personal life because of the change in COVID and the change to my relationship. All the tools and all the processes that I had used to be successful or to keep myself going failed. It was, I think I've said to you, it was like my iOS system was outdated. It was no longer working. The system wasn't talking to the hardware anymore, and I was really struggling. I had to see a psychologist at that point because I couldn't understand why I couldn't motivate myself to work, why things weren't coming together for me, and why I just couldn't move forward and actually do what I had done previously. And I don't like to fail. I certainly don't like to fail. I'm really competitive. And the fact that my personal relationship had failed and I couldn't get myself into a routine that would work for me during COVID, the psychologist started to unpack some things with me that started to point to ADHD and had advised me to look at getting an assessment. So obviously I did pursue that.
Yes.
It came back as very much an obvious diagnosis. I think it was a combined diagnosis, more on the hyperactive side than the inattentive side. But I had a joint diagnosis that confirmed that I did have ADHD.
So what were, if you're comfortable sharing, what were some of the things that you had set up to support yourself that disappeared as that relationship broke down and we were in COVID? What's an example of some of those?
Yeah, like I think because when you are a person with ADHD, you do mask a lot in the workplace, or you do put a lot of effort into your work life to maintain some level of normalcy, if you like, and actually to make sure that you can actually keep things going. So it means when you come, you have to separate work and personal life. So I was able to physically walk out the door,
Yes.
go to work,
Yes.
put my work face on,
Yeah.
do work. And I was also able to come out of work. And even though I had the stuff in work that I had to work really hard to present myself in a certain way, I could come home to my partner and I could unload or unpack or act my default self with judgment.
Yes.
But when both those things went away, so I couldn't separate my environment. And then in addition to that, I couldn't unload or download my default self or the things that I needed to unpack at the end of the day. It was all just hanging there. So it made operating really difficult.
What did you, what was your reaction to the diagnosis?
Well, it's an interesting one because I have worked in this industry for a long time, and I have worked as a psychologist talking to people every day about having different behaviours and actually having clinical diagnoses of neurological conditions, and to see it from a strength-based model and to look at what your strengths are as opposed to the deficit. So I've coached this my entire adult life, but then getting the diagnosis yourself is a journey. Like it's a journey because you I think I've spoken to you about this before. Like as an ADHD person, I have the ability to replay every single moment in my life. I can play back a day and actually work through that day and go, I should have done that. I could have done that differently. I would say this next time that, oh, I would have been able to take that one step further and go better if I'd done X, Y, and Z. So you can actually almost visually replay a day and go back and play it, which is a great advantage to learning and to being able to absorb information. However, it's a disadvantage when you go through a diagnosis of something, and if there's been any parts of your life that have been a challenge, because you then go back retrospectively and you replay every single moment and you go, that happened because of that. That's been an issue because of that. If I had known that then, that would... So I think I spent the first 3 to 6 months reliving my early childhood.
Exhausting.
Absolutely exhausting. And then you have to come to terms with it. You actually have to come to terms with it. You're like, I can't change it. So now you have to use the power of what you know and what you know now moving forward to be able to use it effectively and to be able to use your difference of thought or your different processing system to actually take advantage of it. And I also had to reconcile with myself that while I have this condition, I haven't been unsuccessful. I've been successful despite it. I just had to work a lot harder at it.
And I guess did it help you work out what it is you're doing today? Like, is that?
Yeah, I think it's really helped me to clarify and be clear that when I work now, I won't work in a space unless I'm passionate about it, because there's no point. There's no point in me accelerating my career because of the name of the company or because of what the role is. I know that I'm successful, and I know that I'm driven by change and by making a difference and by working in spaces that interest me or ignite my passion around social impact or making a difference. So I am selective now about the types of work that I'll do or the types of roles that I'll take on. And I think that allows you to be more successful in your career, because when you have a vocation and when you're driven by that vocation, it allows you to be better at what you do.
Were you transparent straight away about your diagnosis? Like, how did that part of the journey go for you?
Well, I actually told my board that I was going for diagnosis.
Yes.
And at the time, my chairperson said, but you're already probably aware that you have it. And I was,
wow.
Yes, I probably am. Like, in some way, I'm aware. But I want the diagnosis. And they were like, but what do you think that they even questioned? So my board chair actually questioned and said, but what do you think the diagnosis will do?
Yes.
At that point in time, I didn't know what it would do. I just felt that I needed, obviously I knew that I was stuck or that something wasn't working. And I did feel that the diagnosis would, to some degree, give me clarity. It might be confronting, but it would give me clarity, and it would give me the right to, I know this is a challenge for people, but it would also give me the right to own it and to actually be able to say, look, I am an ADHD person.
Yes.
I do have a different processing system. If I do find something challenging, I don't find it challenging because I'm inferior or I have a deficit in any way. I am challenged because the world has been built, or the way that workplaces and businesses have been built, just as we knew years back that workplaces were built and systems and policies were put in place that benefited male workforce.
Yes.
That's evolved through time, and better conditions and better environments have occurred to allow females the ability to engage more and further themselves in the workplace. So things like part-time work, flexible working arrangements, breastfeeding, all these things, that hasn't happened yet for neurodiversity. The world is built, and offices and workplaces are built around the neurotypical thinking process. And so it's the environments that challenge neurodivergent people. It's not the neurodivergent people that are challenged. And the more we can work towards helping businesses think about looking at people as individuals and seeing different thought processes and divergence of thought as an advantage and not a deficit, because you don't want everyone to think the same in the workplace.
No.
You get more innovation and you actually get more productivity if you have different minds in the room that can apply different reasoning to different processes.
What do you wish everyone knew? You know, is there, you think of workplaces and leaders and things like that, is there something that you wish everybody knew and understood?
Yeah. What I would like workplaces to think about is to stop looking at people as employees or the role. I would like workplaces and businesses to look at the strengths and characteristics that they need for the role. And then when they look at people coming in, or when they look at their talent or the people that they have inside their organisation, look at those people as individuals and look at their individual strengths, and actually look at how you capitalise on them and how you use their strengths and their capabilities and what they can do, as opposed to trying to get someone to fit into I'd say dot points for a role. Because you get so much more out of people by trying to capitalise out of what they're good at. That's the reason why Google have been successful. If you look at Google and all the sort of like Silicon Valley companies. Google has 2 days in its week where staff are just allowed to free think. So don't work on task. They want you to just come up with ideas or freeball it. Just think about whatever you want to do, come up with a concept, come up with an idea. And that's where they get a chance to innovate, because they allow people that opportunity to use their strengths. And more businesses need to do that.
Do you think, we talked about you being now very open and disclosing your diagnosis. What's your perspective on, do you think people are comfortable, or do you think there are still kind of stigmas attached to sharing that information?
I think it depends who you're talking to. I think some people are, I think people that are definitely more open and understand that people are different. I think there's a curiosity in some people, but I think that depending on what environment you're in, particularly the more established or the more traditional environments that you work in, I think there is a fear around change or different behaviours or unstable in the balance.
Yes.
Like stabilizing the balance of how things should be. And I think that's going to take time. I think that does take time. And I think that people are threatened by what they don't know.
Yes.
I think that people have a bit of reluctance and hesitation. And I think that what is useful is we live in a world of mass technology, and information is readily available to us now. So I think that there is an opportunity now where if there is reluctance or hesitation, or if there is fear and apprehension, I think people can now become more informed quicker, so that they can actually cast aside those unconscious biases or like aversions to people. I think it's much easier to be more informed now, whereas when I started out in my career, if I'd gone out then and said I have ADHD, I have a different thinking system, I have to do X, Y, and Z, could you imagine in terms of trying to explain it then when there wasn't as much information available? I think it's safer to do it now, even in the last couple of years with the surge in female diagnosis. I think it's safer to do it now because there's more information out there. It makes it more acceptable.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I'm reflecting on what you said earlier about you replay all these scenarios. And, I know a lot of people replay a scenario where they might have said something or done something or whatever, and it loops in their brain and they can't get rid of it. And I'm not diminishing, because yours sounds like you're going through every moment and kind of probably almost get stuck in the analysis of that moment. How did you get out of that? You talked about that first 6 months was very much going back and living through everything. How did you actually stop that?
Oh, well, like you said, it's tiring, and it will be all consuming. And I didn't stop it without help. I actually had to regularly speak to the psychologist that I was seeing, and that's where we go on to the sort of part of it's like a grief thing. You actually have to let go. You go through the stages of being sort of engorged in it, like you're totally obsessed by it, and then you go through the grief of it, that your life could have been different if you had all the knowledge that you had available to you.
Yes.
To actually be more successful, or to actually work without the sort of challenges that you had that were dealt to you. But you go through that grief into anger, frustration, annoyance, and you replay it. And then eventually, like I said, we had to go through a point of acceptance. And that's when she did make me go through the whole point of, but you haven't been unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Despite everything, you have to start thinking about, despite that, and despite all the stuff you're playing back on, look at where you're at, and start to use that as your sort of tools to go forward. So that's where it kind of, it's not that I have completely stopped doing it. I still go back to some things and be like, oh, I know that could have been that was like a seminal moment that I know could have worked out totally differently.
Yes.
Had I known. But I now go at it with but what I do know now means that it won't happen again, or it means that I now have these tools that I can now do this, and this differently.
And what are some of the tools that you now rely on?
The tools that I use most are honesty.
Yes.
I think being honest and being transparent about how something is making you feel. And I think not being a people pleaser. I think that actually sometimes you have to allow others to be uncomfortable. So I think sometimes being honest and calling things out as opposed to just going through the motions, I think has been really important, and that's been liberating in a way. So, and I probably to some degree have always been quite honest, but maybe not to the degree that I am now with myself. And I think that's been good in terms of the skills that I have now and the strategies that I use now, that it's not about being cruel, it's not about being critical of people, but it's being very factual and constructive in how I approach things. And I do that now. Like, I'm trying to be really honest with myself, and I do that when I'm talking to other people as well. I'm not being rude.
What's an example? Can you think of an example?
Oh, well, when things aren't working. So if something's not working in the workplace, or if something isn't working with another person, and I'm not coping with the way that, so someone just fires lots of questions at me,
Yes.
and asks me for my opinion on something,
Yes.
for example, and expects me to answer it right there and then.
Yes.
I will be able to go back and say, look, I can give you an answer just now, but it's in the moment, it's on the spot. I've not had the time to really give it the thought that it deserves. I don't have all the information available to me. You know a lot more about this subject, obviously, than I do. So if you send me the content that you've got, if you give me the time to look at it, I will come back to you with a more informed response and be more prepared in terms of how I can help provide feedback on this. And that I probably wouldn't used to do that. I would just deal with it. I would just be like, yeah, sure, and I would just like fire things back. But now I can give a lot more richer time or effort to something, because I'll be honest and I'll say, well, I'm not giving you my best answer right now.
Give yourself the space to actually do the deep thinking that you need to do on it. So any other practical strategies that you use?
Well, as an ADHD person, chaos is your life in terms of what's in your brain. So you have to be really organized on the outside. So the really useful thing that I think most people with ADHD will say is giving yourself some type of structure. Because if you don't give yourself the structure, if you don't give yourself that sort of planned time to do things, and actually give yourself that ability to take gaps, to take time out and work that into your time, that if you don't give yourself that structure and don't be kind to yourself to do that, it makes work really, really hard. You can actually be way more effective if you build in to your time that you need thinking time, that you need focus time, that you will need to, if you're in a meeting, you'll need time after the meeting to digest the thought from the meeting and take out your head what you need to take from that meeting. If you allow yourself the opportunity to build that in, to do that, you can be so much more productive.
And you've built those in as strategies to help you thrive. I think everyone needs to be conscious of that. For you, I know that would reach a tipping point that would present a real challenge. But that is terrific advice for anybody, to make sure that there is the space to digest and think between the activities they're doing.
100%. And the other tool that I've used particularly now, because I've gone into a new role recently, the people don't know me, the teams don't know me, and the work that I did with Specialisterne definitely allowed me to understand, when I was working in different businesses, the importance of actually understanding the person and understanding what makes the person tick and what makes the person work more effectively. So in going into my new team, I have asked all my team to do a team profile, which is a behaviour profile about where they work best, what type of communication they prefer. Do they prefer written, auditory, or visual communication? Do they prefer a combined mix? Do they work better in meetings in the morning? Do they prefer face-to-face or online? What do they need to be set up well in their task? How they like to work with one another? So I actually built a preference or a model for myself so that people could see, so that things like, if you want the best from me, give me some context, give me content, allow me to plan, don't walk in the door,
Yes.
book time in, send me the material first, give me time to read and digest the material, then have a meeting and let's come up with a solution to it. So I've actually done that with the entire team. So now I understand how they communicate and how they best work so that I can get the best out of them. And I've also done it with myself.
Amazing. Who are you as a leader and how do you thrive? And who are they as individuals and how do they thrive?
Yeah.
And then the interesting thing, I know the follow-up question people will have is, how do you take account for all of those different preferences when it comes to having get the group together?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And it was interesting because even though people have really individual preferences, like what you said earlier about the advice that I give around giving yourself time would benefit everyone. When I read everybody's profiles, there was stuff in it that I was like, this is almost universally consistent around what people need to feel safe, what people need to feel confident in their work. So I analysed everybody's material and I came up with a common thread that we came up with while everybody has their individual nuances around how they want to work, we built a team mission purpose around how we want to, like a manifesto, how we want to work together.
Brilliant.
On the common threads of what people needed in the team. And those are the things that we've agreed to. So we've agreed to like have an open communication. We've agreed to working on a channel where we communicate and tell each other what we're doing for the week. We have a longer meeting once a week where we actually get to introduce problems or bring problems to the table that we can help group solve. We agree that all meetings should be agended. We've actually built a rules of engagement.
Fantastic. That's amazing. You said earlier that you love to solve problems. So it sounds like you've solved a good one there. What is your mind working on right now solving? What's the big problem in front of you right now?
Right now I'm working in a public health space. And public health is a really complex environment. It's a machine, it's massive, and it's got so many different types of staff. You've got doctors, you've got policy advisors, you've got clinicians, nurses, ancillary staff. It's a massive network of different people. And that means different ABAs, different levels of experience. But I'm trying to look at it from a diversity lens, and I'm trying to make sure that regardless of what the environment is inside health, that how we work as an employer organisation or as a business, that we make ourselves accessible to all different diversities, because I don't think that's currently happening. I think there's pockets, like any big business that I've been, there's pockets of it, and there's pockets where they're doing it really, really well. But then there's places inside the organisation that aren't touching it. So my problem to solve is to find a middle ground where we can actually have a baseline of there needs to be equitable access and inclusion of people that are diverse, who feel comfortable coming into work in health.
Amazing. Julie, thank you so much for joining the conversation and for just being so open and vulnerable and having your own mask off as we've gone through the conversation. The final question I ask everybody is, from your perspective, what does brave feminine leadership mean, and do you think it needs to change?
It's a really good question. I think brave feminine leadership is about being vulnerable. I think it's about not having all the answers. I think it's about being willing to put yourself out there and actually have people see you as a person. And I think it's about being willing to take feedback from people and to learn from your mistakes and know that you're not going to get everything right straight away, but having the courage to go and stick at it, because you are going to fail. There's nobody that is successful out there without having some failures first. And I think that's important for all leaders or aspiring leaders to know that you're going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. For females, I think you have to work harder. I think that there is a patriarchy out there, and it will continue to happen. It's getting a lot better. But you do still have to, and you will still experience it from time to time. You'll experience challenges in terms of authenticity, in terms of getting things across the line, in terms of being taken seriously. And again, that's about having that grit to just go, do you know what? I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep at this, and I'm going to persist, because I'm going to make change. And despite the fact that there is patriarchy and that those things do still happen, I do think that the world is moving forward. And I think that, like you said to me, how do you stop ruminating and going back to the things that aren't working? Well, we actually have to go forward in a space as female leaders and look at the things that are working and draw attention to all businesses around why it's important to have female leadership and why we need to persist and why we need to be in boardrooms and why we need to be on exec.
Amazing. Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for being part of such an important conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. It's been really good to talk with you.